die Angebote.
Das war nicht dies. Hallo Martin.
Hallo.
Hi. Die Schwaben-Gang.
Der kommt aber aus dem richtigen Teil. Seitdem ist seit Unterland. Die sind doch alle protestantisch.
Als mir Romeo erzählte, dass das Erste, was er sagte, und das war's dann eigentlich. Das war so, das hat alles
Da
gefragt.
kommen die Eltern.
Ja?
Da wird halt geschafft.
Naja.
Ich wusste gar nicht, dass du hier auch.
Das haben wir überall Fragen. Also ich war die Handkartenladen und kann mit mir Fragen ich gehe schon ins Telefon.
Ich wusste jetzt gar nicht von NDC, aber ich kenne es zuarbeiten.
Das wird was in der Kirche.
Das erinnert das, was man überlegst dir gut.
So, wegschwitzt. Das ewige wegschwitzt. Was nicht ist,
Wen meinst du jetzt?
Da bin ich schon ganz nervös.
Ich schreibe sogar einen Bericht.
Was? Warum?
Willst du, dass ich dir hinterherlaufe? Was denn da?
Está en las NDCs, de Guatemala.
Ah, sí, tal vez, ¿verdad?
NDCs Guatemala. Toda la NDC.
No voy a concentrar entonces. ¿Verdad?
Yes.
Gracias. Muy amable. Okay.
Metà, metà.
Metà Wales. Io sono delle giornate. Ho vissuto sono stata concentrata nella
Ah, ok.
Also,
This is our business event.
yeah. What is the call? Picture. Oh, please, please.
So, hello everybody and welcome. We always pick the most difficult slots for our side events, which is lunchtime, when you even had your lunch and you're terribly tired now, or you didn't have lunch and you're terribly hungry now. If that's the case, I have a piece of good news. After the meeting, we will have food for you, but only after the meeting. Of a series of 3 meetings of the Rome-based agencies, IFAD, World Food Programme, and the Food and Agriculture Organization. My name is Martin Frick. I'm with the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. And what we're trying to do in these side events is, after short introductions from our panelists, to really get into a conversation with you around the NDCs and the current situation. In the first meeting, we were looking at loss and damage and resilience in the context of agriculture and climate change. In the second meeting, we were specifically looking into national adaptation plans and how they resonate with NDCs. And today, we want to ask the broader question about NDCs, agriculture sectors, and realizing the Paris Agreement. We started from our FAO side prior to the Paris Agreement, when the first INDCs came in, analyzing them and looking, of course, with interest at our agricultural sectors. And I always need to say that we are speaking about the agriculture sectors. What we mean is forestry, agriculture, fisheries, and also aquaculture. So basically all of the food producing system. And it became already clear prior to Paris that the land sector plays a very prominent role. You can find our analysis online. And we have more than roughly 90% of the countries who actually expressed interest to work in the land sectors. So this is, of course, a massive mandate for all of the Rome-based agencies working around food. And we want to know how we can better support our member states in implementing the NDCs and how we turn the political commitment in the NDCs into action. And of course, capacity constraints play a huge role. Countries have often noted the need for technical support, which is what an organization like FAO, World Food Programme, IFAD can do, but also financial support. And so part of our work and ongoing work is advocating for funneling climate finance into the agriculture sectors, specifically saying that it's not just a specific intervention to work on adaptation in agriculture or mitigation in agriculture. It's always multi-sectoral, and it is hugely context specific. Depending where you are, you can, with the same measures, increase resilience, at the same time mitigate to climate change, but you're also fighting rural poverty. You're empowering women. If you think of sub-Saharan Africa, where many of the farming households are actually led by women. You're looking into watershed management if you're protecting forests. But forests in return are more than just a solid piece of carbon. They are livelihood to indigenous peoples. They are vital to biodiversity. They are water stores, and so on and so forth. So we're trying to look into these complexity and also make the case that in the land sectors, in the agriculture sectors, these many dimensions, Sendai framework of action, sustainable development goals, Paris Agreement, NDCs, together. And I'm happy we have a great panel here with us today to discuss these questions. To my right, and we were joking already because this feels like a family reunion. We've been on many panels this week in different formats. Is Lucy Nganga from Kenya. She is from the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries, exactly our questions. I have Ambassador Rita Marchand from Guatemala next to me, who is also chairing the independent group of Latin American countries. And all the way to the left is Romeo Bertolini from the NDC Partnership, which is, as you know, one of the results of COP22, who will talk to us about how the NDC Partnership can come in and support realizing the NDCs. Still missing is Walter Treuhand Cabal. I always have difficulties pronouncing his name. He will join us a little bit later. Walter is the agriculture negotiator from Uruguay, and certainly a known figure. So without much ado, Lucy, I would start with you, asking you what your experience in Kenya is about the land sectors, the agricultural sectors in the NDCs, the potential, the challenges, the needs. You have the floor, please. I can give you this microphone.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a privilege and an honor again to be here. Again, I think we are family. Colleagues, Paris Agreement came with the NDCs. Unlike it has been analyzed by FAO, a big chunk of the NDCs have featured agriculture as one of their avenues into achieving these commitments. Now, I'm giving a Kenyan scenario, and the relationship of NDCs and large sector is an interesting question, because I would ask, why ask that? And if almost 80% and above of the NDCs have featured that agriculture will be one of the avenues they're going to use, agriculture sits on land, soil, however you want to call it. And so it is an important question as well, because it is that land where crops will be grown, fish will be reared, livestock will be bred, and forestry will be, of course, established and cared for. So in Kenya NDC, agriculture sector is through what we call climate smart agriculture. And climate smart agriculture, of course, now encompasses, we all know the pillars of the productivity, the resilience, adaptation, and of course the core benefits that comes along with that. So agriculture is expected to ensure that productivity is achieved. However, along the way, emissions from the same land sector where agriculture is being practiced are expected to be reduced. Obviously, like we say in the developing countries, that without compromising food security, because that's crucial for us. And that's why we always want to flag out adaptation as our core, as our main agenda. But of course, we don't also want to be ignorant that as you do your agriculture, you have that moral obligation, that moral fiber, that where possible, you need actually to reduce the emissions. So in climate smart agriculture, adaptation and mitigations have their synergies. And they will get their synergies in depending on what interventions you're taking up. For example, if you're going to practice conservation agriculture, you're going to have to embrace adaptation, and as well as along the way, you'll also have the mitigations, because when you're disturbing your soil minimally, what you're saying is that you are making sure that you're not putting more carbon to the atmosphere. You're also ensuring that your residue is retained, so you're adding more organic matter into the soil and more so. I'm sure we know that story. If you're going to have to do zero grazing, that you'll have a package of biogas established within the zero grazing units, then what are you doing? You're going to adaptation, yes, but the fact that you're ensuring that your methane gas is captured and used in a more efficient way, in a more better way, you are mitigating, aren't you? So if you're going to establish and promote agroforestry, what are you doing? Of course, you're creating that ecosystem in the agriculture sector on land, where you're going to have, you either grow shrubs or trees that are going to feed livestock. You're going to have trees that are going to produce fruits and incomes. You're going to have integration where the trees are also contributing to nitrogenous stability of the soil, and meaning that the agricultural production from that soil is higher. So there's food security, there are incomes. And we all know that when you put your trees together, then system, you have that microclimate within the farming environment stabilized. Welcome, my colleague.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, the negotiations from the other side are not easy to step out from, because we're at a point where, things are tight. So I appreciate that it takes effort for him to come here. So welcome, Walter.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, however, there are challenges, because even as we pursue this same land has to ensure that the food security is achieved, but on the other hand, the emissions are reduced. But this is the same agriculture that if production per unit area is not enhanced and the productivity is lower, so you end up opening more RAD. So when you open more RAD, what happens? You're not achieving the same matrix that we have been discussing. The same agriculture will find itself encroaching into the forest. The same forests we want to preserve for the carbon sink. So the challenge is, how do we then have approaches that are going to ensure that the productivity increase, and more so per unit area within reasonably good amounts of input, so that if you're going to feed a number of people per unit area, you don't have to open so much land to expose so much of that to production, But again, you don't want a situation where you are producing 10 bags in an acre when you can produce 20 bags in an acre, because then you only need half an acre to do the 10 bags. You don't need to open up 1 acre. So those challenges are the challenges that are before us. And they're the challenges even as we go forward to implement the contributions that we have committed ourselves to. There will require technologies that will go with this, capacities, both for personnel and institution support. Of course, the resources to do this. So that is so that you ensure that this sector is able now to produce enough food. Once there is enough food, the food security is taken care of, their incomes. We have integrated agriculture in a way that the land sector itself is sustainably existing in terms of its biodiversity, its productivity. Then the issue of emissions along the way will be taken care of. And the final thing that I want to put in the challenges then, how are we going to capture these emissions from the agriculture sector? How are we going to account for them? How are the developing countries expected to do that? Even the negotiations, where my colleague is coming from, the issue of capacity in terms of technologies and other capacities are not taken forward to a level where it can now be taken to the developing countries. How then are we going to, to capture them? Because it must be to a point where globally we are agreeing this is the methodology we are going to use. Of course, I'm aware that every country, every region, there are methodologies going around, pilot, major ones, but there must be concerted effort globally that this is at the COP level, it's a decision that has been made that this is the way we want to go, so that collectively when a farmer in Uruguay and another one in Kenya and another in Peru are saying that they are sequestering or capturing 1 ton of carbon from their biogas system in their daily system, it's acceptable and can be agreed on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I think it shows 2 things wonderfully. One is the complexities of the sectors. It's a huge interdependent system. And whenever you work on agriculture, you're actually working on the basis, of course, of biological processes. And sometimes I'm stunned how little we actually do understand about the food production deep down in the ecological system, while we're actually already tinkering with the system. And then how is this complex logic applying in the UNFCCC process that started from a completely different vantage point? That was basically looking into easily accountable emissions from power production and into areas where few players are dominating a market. Now, in our sectors, it's difficult to account for the emissions. It's not always comparable because, as you said, the farm in Uruguay has completely different conditions than the farming lady in Kenya, for example. And then how do you reach out to a community that is not counted in the dozens, but it's actually counted in the hundreds of millions of people in the farming community? So I want to go to my left to Ambassador Rita Misan. Rita, NDCs, let me be a little bit provocative. What you have in the NDCs, is that high hopes for agriculture? Is that based on experience? How much of it is a leap of faith? How much of it is what you already know? Where are the challenges in the implementation of NDCs in the land sectors? And maybe also to foreshadow a little bit the discussion, are there opportunities? Is that the source where we can maybe up with higher ambition when we start with the global stocktake in 2018? Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martin, and good afternoon to all of you. I wanted to go a bit further back in history when the challenge starts at COP19 and COP20, when all countries are invited to commit to present our intended national determined commitments. That was a challenge in itself because developing countries we all know that the percentage that we emit to global, the global emissions that we emit are very small compared to big economic countries. Therefore, it was a challenge to even convince our governments and our people in-house in order to compromise to this design of the INDC, which was established in COP19 and then re-established in COP20. Therefore, the challenge starts there, to convince all these people in order to make sure that we all committed to work towards the long-term goal that is established in Article 2 of Paris Agreement. Then the challenge, once we presented our international determined commitments, the challenge starts in the implementation of these commitments, because even if our governments presented these INDCs at the moment, not all stakeholders were involved in the designing of these INDCs, even though in the case of Guatemala, we have the climate change law, which creates a climate change national table where all sectors are present, but all these sectors is one person per sector. Therefore, even though these sectors approved our INDC, does not necessarily mean that they were all convinced or understanding of what it entails. And certainly, once we presented it and then ratified by early 2000, well, it was signed in New York in April 21 of 2015, and then we ratified. The commitment grows even stronger for all sectors to implement the NDC. All sectors, meaning agriculture, meaning industry, meaning energy. Therefore, this is the process that we are in. And then we have another challenge, to review the NDC for 2023 for the global stocktake. This is another commitment. And the countries, and I would say not only Guatemala, all developing countries are on the same boat. We're all reviewing, we're all facing the problematic of having everyone on board in order to implement what we have committed to. And then now on top, we have to review by 2023, which is, to say the least, very, very difficult for countries like Guatemala. I have learned from other groups of from other regional groups, like some of our colleagues in Africa, that even the design of the INDC was difficult because they couldn't do it, so they had to bring in international consultants that worked for them and helped them in the design of the INDC, but then they left. And so now the challenge is even greater for them, because they even have to understand how this was, how did they came out with the numbers and how to implement what they have to do. So for developing countries, it's very difficult. And now going back to the issue of agriculture, we all know that the agricultural sector is one of the greater emitters in our countries, because our countries, like my country, is mainly agriculture, and also we have a lot of cattle, livestock, and we are doing a lot of efforts in forestry and agroforestry in order to change that trend. But for example, if we are working on the low emission development strategy, because we all know we have to change the development models that we have established from so many years ago in order to reduce our emissions. And this creates a great difficulty specifically in agriculture, due to the fact that in agriculture it's so difficult to have methodologies to number how many cattle there are in the country. we can have numbers in the energy sector, because the energy sector is at the highest level and works hand in hand with governments. But in agriculture, we have all people inland, and we don't know how many. I mean, we know how the population in our country, but we don't know who's doing what. And then they encounter the difficulties that climate change is imposing in the agriculture itself. Therefore, it's a difficult challenge for Guatemala, I assume for many of our developing countries, specifically in Central America, I can speak of, and some of our island countries too. Therefore, we don't have answers for that, but we are doing these low emission development strategies, which are helping us to design the methodologies in order to have the indicators, the necessary indicators to present in our communications and the reports we are still designing in the negotiations, in order to present feasible data, because that's exactly what we need to achieve our commitments. Nonetheless, aside from the factor that agriculture is very difficult, the industry sector is also very difficult, because they didn't commit. We committed for them. And therefore, this is something that is very complicated, and the capacity building that we have to bring home, the technology transfer that is needed for this, the means of implementation and support is so important, because there is innovation all around the globe, some countries more than others, and I think we can have some solutions with South-South cooperation. And I am in the capacity building. I am honored to be in the Paris Committee for Capacity Building. Therefore, we are designing our work plan, and we are dreaming. I am a dreamer, so we are dreaming on how to make sure that we can do a database that within the platform that's already established, the information needed for us to be able to access other experiences and best practices in order to advance in these issues. Therefore, there are more challenges than solutions. Nonetheless, I am a very positive person, and I believe together we can find solutions, and thanks to the support that we have of FAO in all our countries, there are a lot of projects advancing specifically in resilience and food security, and we hope to continue doing this work together. But yes, the agencies, the UN agencies, have to work together. They have to coordinate. Here we talk in the negotiations about coordination, about coherence, but we have to do it all. It's not only the parties that will have to talk about it and dream about it, because it's difficult to advance in that sense, but UN agencies have also a compromise to do so. Therefore, I invite you all to continue the work, and we are here to support the work and in our homes to do what is intended to be done. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think you hit the nail on the head when you basically said that the first challenge was actually to convince a developing country to be part of this entire exercise when you contributed so little to it. But then at the same time, it's politically so important to have every single country on board. Second point you mentioned is, and of course we realize that you have in so many countries the agriculture sectors as part of the NDCs. But if you take a magnifying glass, how this came upon, often international consultants, often one ministry defining the NDCs, and the buy-in of the agriculture community and our constituency as FAO, the ministers of agriculture, is something that we are building only now. Often they were not involved. So it's a big challenge to get everybody on board, and also to work the national side. When you just still work to get everybody on board from the NDCs to already look into the future for the next level of NDCs. Walter, of course, we want to know from you how the situation in Uruguay is, but you already asked the question, so what can be done for implementation? You were with the first meeting of the NDC Partnership Working Group on the agricultural sector, so eager to learn what happened there. And also, of course, since you're a negotiator, we are all curious whether we see white smoke coming up from the negotiation room or it's still black smoke. So please, fantastic, many questions and exactly 7 minutes to answer.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much for inviting us to this very important opportunity to exchange experiences and ideas. And I have this couple of questions here in the program. See, what we would like to share is that Uruguay included both mitigation and adaptation in its NDC, but we included mitigation in what is our understanding of what is mitigation in agriculture. We consider that mitigation in agriculture is something completely different to mitigation in other sectors because of the strong linkage between mitigation and food security. So we cannot reduce emissions reducing the production of food. Then in our, what we have reflected in our NDC is a commitment to reduce the emissions intensity of our main production crops and livestock, and to increase as much as possible soil organic carbon sequestration. And for us, soil organic carbon and carbon in woody biomass is very important because it is very much integrated with other dimensions of adaptation, productivity, soil health. So it's a very win-win-win strategy. The challenges is to monitor and report in our NDCs are different in the case of mitigation and in the case of adaptation. In mitigation, we have to report tons of CO2 or tons of methane or tons of N2O. But it seems simple, but it's not simple. It's very complicated because to estimate our emissions or our removals, we need statistics, dynamic statistics, frequently updated. So capacity building in order to strengthen our statistics systems and adapt them to the new challenges of monitoring and reporting every 5 years is important. If we have the same statistics all the time, then every 5 years we're going to report exactly the same number and no progress at all. So statistics and what is called in the inventories the activity data is one fundamental part of the challenges that we need to address. And the other is to have the emission factors and the removal factors that can be nationally determined and can be updated frequently in order to reflect policies to improve the efficiency of our production systems. It is clear that if we report always using the same emission factors, they will not reflect the changes in the real world. Well, in case of adaptation, it's much more complex because adaptation is very wide concept that has several or many dimensions. So it's not easy to find one indicator that reflects our progress in adaptation. We still don't have this issue solved. I think this is something we have to discuss because it may be also the concern for many other parties, how to create a framework in order to assess or to track our progress in adaptation. And finally, using the last 3 minutes, I wish to go to the second point by Martin, which is the outcomes of the thematic working group meeting that was held in Rome 2 weeks ago as part of the NDC Partnership in Agriculture. There was a definition that all sectors are going to be reflected as agriculture. So agriculture is not including only crops or livestock, but also forestry and trying to bridge forest and agriculture in the landscape. And linking the action with food security, with ending hunger as very relevant sustainable development goals, and also thinking beyond adaptation and mitigation, because adaptation and mitigation have to be mainstreamed into our national development policies. It's not something separate. It's something that only makes sense if it is fully integrated. And to finalize, this Inception workshop in 4 and 5 May in Rome agreed to develop what it's called the terms of reference for the work of this. It will be created an interactive online platform for countries exchange on NDC implementation. This is the focus, because we know well that the core of the Paris Agreement are the NDCs, and the challenges of NDCs implementation are for all countries. It's not as in the Kyoto Protocol that only Annex 1 countries had to do things. Now we have contributions from all countries. So this is new for many non-Annex 1 countries to cope with addressing, setting targets. Well, a lot of capacity building needs have to be defined, gaps in capacities have to be identified, and this NDC partnership will be a very important framework to contribute with parties to address these needs and to fill these gaps that are identified. So the thematic working group will develop a draft of terms of reference. It will be country-led drafting working group, and the objective and activities of this group are based on the outcomes of the workshop I've said before. And it is very important to stress that this will be a participatory process, that it will include all members of the NDC partnership, and all members of the thematic working groups will be consulted in the drafting process. So I think this is a very important feature, that it's not something that is going to be cooked somewhere, but it's going to be a transparent process, very informative, very open to opinions of all members of this initiative. So I think that I not want to exceed my 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Martin, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Walter. Can I dare the last question about the negotiations?
Yes. Well,
just thumbs up, down.
3 days ago, we were saying in another meeting, we are very happy because we are seeing a lot of progress, and really an unexpected progress, and we are being very ambitious. And now there is not white smoke. Today at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, we will have the contact group, and in this stage, SABSTA has only achieved what is called a procedural conclusion. So it's a conclusion that is not substantive, but at least we are keeping on board all the progress that was done during these days of very hard and very productive work, that is reflected in a non-paper prepared by the facilitators that you will have the opportunity to read. And it is very good, very positive that this non-paper keeps track of what we have been discussing and elaborating here, and it will be maintained as an input for future work during SABSTA 47 and COP23. And well, who knows? Agriculture is so important that it is difficult to think that it can disappear. So maybe we can find, I hope we can find a way to come again into the good track to progress.
Thank you very much, Walter. We would certainly support that there's something coming out of SABSTA. It's slowly getting difficult to justify my travel expenses going to the CUP and to SABSTA when there's no progress. So we still hope that next time we can be coming with an FAO delegation. But seriously, you mentioned also the NDC Partnership workshop that yielded the first working group. We have here Romeo Bertolini, who is the Deputy Director for Country Engagement of the NDC Partnership. And maybe you can give us a bit of a bigger picture about the NDC Partnership established in Marrakesh last year. Where are we so far? Where do you intend to go? Romeo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Martin, and thanks for having me here, and also thanks for the panelists. You actually already made my day because you mentioned so many issues that we actually tried to address with the NDC partnership ever since we had the first thoughts about establishing a global alliance to deal with the fact that Paris became a success, and deal with the fact that the NDCs became the central instrument of Paris, basically. So the question was at the very beginning in Paris, when we saw this is coming up, how do we deal with the issue of another kind of mechanism globally? How do we deal with the nexus or the interdependency between climate issues and the sectoral issues, and of course the financing of it all? How do we deal with the SDGs in that context, and especially, and Walter has mentioned it, how do we relate this to the development planning of the countries, and how do we convince finance ministers? How do we convince the sectoral ministers to join the environmental ministers, that not only ministries that don't not always have a good position in the government and are pretty weak, to join them and to achieve something that is meaningful and concrete, and does take into account the need of the countries to grow, economically grow, and socially grow, but at the same time also detach this growth from the growth of emissions. Now, talking to countries from the very beginning in this process, there was a broad understanding that there needs to be high-level attention to this kind of issue, and of course, Paris as a very dynamic process, and gave so much momentum and impetus to this whole process that it was very easy to gain this momentum and to gain people to join us to make something out of this Paris thing. So it is the NDC partnership was basically drafted and developed out of Paris in an exchange between developed countries, multilateral institutions that basically saw the need to integrate climate more than ever into development issues, and to mainstream it into the fiscal and budgetary kind of process in the country, because without that it will not be possible to go ahead. So that developed something. What we have now is about I would say it's an alliance of more than 60 countries and 10 to 15 international organizations that tries to lobby on one hand for the high level on the high level political level, lobbying for of Paris in the governments, better understanding of the environmental issues in the governments, that tries to go to the countries and integrate climate change into and mainstream it into the development planning, and eventually also, as time goes by, ideally, of course, there needs to be an integration of the climate activities into the budget of the planning ministry. So this is basically the broad idea. We came together, there was high political attention. There are 40 plus developing countries members, and we have about 15 industrialized country members, and name it FAO, UNDP, UNFCCC, UNEP, World Bank, all kinds of regional development banks that joined that club so far. We are still a startup, we are still building up, and we as the support unit of the NDC partnership, we try to develop this process further on basically two operational levels. One will address what also Ambassador said, will address the knowledge part and the know-how on the global level, including creating linkages, connecting dots between countries that are advanced, less advanced, that have advantages and in that area or the other, so that there is a kind of a continuous exchange about NDC implementation. only, of course, the environmental sector and the climate sector, but all kinds of sectors that are around, and of course, including agriculture as a one very important one. The second operational kind of angle of the partnership, which is much more important actually, is to go to the countries. And you made my day with saying the NDCs have been designed and written by consultants, then they went away. Now the countries sit there and have no idea how to implement it to some extent. Maybe some have an idea, but there's not a broad understanding. And this is exactly what we try to do with NDC Partnership Support Unit and our partners, our members. We try to link this NDC process on a global level to the country processes, and that I have done in a couple of countries. My colleagues do that in countries. That is a very, very satisfying kind of activity, because you go there and you can really directly discuss with stakeholders from all kind of areas how this NDC issues are linked with their own development goals and their own development planning. So that works quite well. I could give you a couple of examples, but I think we can also reduce that to the discussion, or to postpone it to the discussion. The important thing is to keep the momentum of Paris and to try to detach or not to detach basically the climate from the other activities in the country. And that's also why we have been initiating, and we're so happy to have FAO doing this working group, which apparently goes quite well and makes quite a difference. And what you said also, that it has to be bottom up and it has not to be flying in from outside, is also a very, very important aspect, which we always get feedback from. Don't send us consultants. Try to use national system. Try to use what's there. We have so many people here that are knowledgeable. We have donors here. The money is there. Try to build on what's there, not superimpose other structures.
Okay, thank you very much, Truman. We did a point landing. We have exactly now half of the meeting time left for what we really want to do, which is engaging with you, hearing your questions, your comments, your concerns. And Walter will have, or Julia will have, the task with a wonderful blue box. There's a microphone in there. So if you dare to raise your hand, this blue box will be flying your way and you can ask a question. Who will be going first? Who is the icebreaker? Who dares to ask the first question, a comment on your experience with the NDCs? We heard perspectives from Uruguay, from Kenya, from Guatemala, and from the NDC Partnership. Who wants to ask a question? Who wants to comment? So, yes, please. Bravo, the lady in the fourth row. If you catch this one. Yeah, this is a collaborative exercise. Please.
What should I do with this?
There's a black spot and this is a microphone.
Okay. I'm Lucia Perugini, delegates from Italy, dealing with the FAO issues. And I had a question from, first, thank you for the presentation. Very interesting to have an insight of what is going on the ground. And it's very important for us as a negotiator to keep an eye on the reality, just not to get lost. And on the, I have a question, actually a specific question to Rita. If you, on the capacity building database you were mentioning, I think it's very important to have these activities on capacity building, especially in agriculture. It's a continuous evolving sector, and we know that there is a huge need of capacity data and statistics, as Walter was mentioning. So how this capacity building database that you are aiming, and under which setting, is in the Durban platform, or I don't know if you could provide some other insight on that. And also the call for the coordination with you and UN agencies, I think it's very important. And under your point of view, what could be the best way this to be implemented in reality, and how they can coordinate in a more effective way, from your opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I can take one or two more questions. There's I think the negotiator from India, I recognize. Yes, please. If we can get the cube to you.
It's a little far.
Hand delivered. Please, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for this very nice presentations and very nice workshop. I would like to share that as far as India is concerned, we have more than 600 districts. We have prepared the contingency agricultural plans. Chair, why I'm saying this, and panel, why I'm saying this is because agriculture will have to keep in the backdrop 2 or 3 things. One is the declining farm yields. It's a fact. The other is our dangerous dependence as human race on a very narrow genetic base. 10 or 12 crops standing between man and starvation. Third point is that in this whole game, climate is an additional stressor. Climate has come to us, climate change has come to us as an additional problem. And one more point which needs to be seen in terms of developing country perspective. You see, the problems come to developing countries in the form of a delegation. There is a problem of climate change, biodiversity loss, desertification, this, that. In the United Nations, you have different agencies. You segregated your problems. But when it comes to developing countries, they knock at your door as a delegation that, look, we are here and we are going to stay with you. And in terms of agriculture, if you further analyze, you see the adaptation is something which all countries will need to do. Developing economies in transition, centrally industrializing states. Why? Because this is like a postage parcel on which there are no stamps. Wrong address. It has come to your place. You have to relieve it. In terms of mitigation, the question mark which you have put rightly on the right hand side, last word, land sector, question mark. And that is where the negotiations are at the moment in the subsidiary bodies. Because sector being only very small, nobody wants to enter into the uncharted waters of mitigation. People first want adaptation. That is how it is looked at. As far as India is concerned, Chair, I was trying to share, we have around more than 600 districts where we have made contingency agricultural plans. We have also climate proof more than 150 villages on a model basis. We have around 9 million hectares brought under drip and sprinkler irrigation because water is a increasingly scarce commodity worldwide. We have also indulged into organic farming in a very big way. We are developing around more than 500 varieties which have been identified and released, which are climate resilient of different crops. And we are moving towards biofertilizers and so on. Having said all this, yet the question remains, in such a small sector, why not first tackle the pressing need? Because it's like house on fire. When your house is on fire, what do you save? You save your children first. You save your gold later on. You save many other non-substantive things later on. But so when the entire thing is knocking at the doors of developing countries, the idea is that let us first adapt and let us concentrate on adaptation. Because the mitigation is somewhere where it is the developed countries who have to take lead. Let them take lead in agriculture also. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And there is a third question here in front. And then I would go back to the panel for a first round of answers, but I think we can also do a second round of questions. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you for the statements and all this very important key information. I would like to share a kind of concern related. It's not a question, but a kind of concern, which is regarding the general idea of mainstreaming climate change action through national state apparatus into the case of agriculture, which we know agriculture sector is directly linked to rural population, which is directly linked to a very part of societies that has been marginalized and still marginalized in many countries. So the politics of agriculture, which is to say the politics of land use, is strongly related with structures of domination and marginalization in most of the countries. I'm talking very closely from the case of Colombia, which is now facing a very important challenge in that direction of land use and how to manage their own land. Thus, there is a plenty of cases and examples how national policies and actions in the field of agriculture, of land use, lead to more marginalization, less empowerment of small farmers or local forest communities. And therefore, my very concern is this mainstreaming of climate change has something new to offer that will mitigate this kind of things that we know, or might contribute to make it most of the same. I'm just concerned about this gap between the politics. I'm not talking about the policies of agriculture, but the politics of agriculture and land use, and the bottom of the sector. Let's say it's like this gap is what is my main concern. We're not sure if you can probably elaborate on that.
Thank you very much. I think, yeah, maybe we take one more question just in front of you.
Here.
Please.
Jorge Cabrera from Guatemala. To increase the political will of our politicians, of our governments and private sector, do you have in mind any idea to include that issue of agriculture and NDCs in the facilitative dialogue?
Okay, let me try to sum up the questions. So, including agriculture in the facilitative dialogue, I think, yes, we are working definitely in this perspective, but I'm putting the question to the panelists. Question from India about the burning problems of smallholder farmers and that adaptation comes first, where comes mitigation? And I think, Lucy, you alluded in your presentation to this question of the relationship between mitigation and adaptation. And maybe we start with a question that was directly addressed to you about the database and how this work sits and how that might be actually resonating with other initiatives as well. So Rita, please.
Thank you very much. I mentioned the capacity building portal that was created in 2012 in order to respond to some of the initiatives that countries had in order to exchange information about the projects around the world regarding and supporting capacity building. The PCCB met for the first time during the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th of last week. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It was the first time we meet, and we designed the work plan for the next, for the period originally is 2016-2020. So now we worked on the 3-year plan. Mainly, the focus area for the following 2 years is NDCs implementation, which falls right into the category of what we're speaking of. And during that, during those discussions, we reviewed the portal, and there were other stakeholders in the room. It was open to observers. Therefore, we exchanged and interacted with them. And one of the issues is that there's a lot of lessons learned and best practices that we can take into consideration in order to to innovate this portal using other tools and criteria in order to have a better basis for exchanging information specifically on certain capacity building activities that are taking place within the portal, because the portal has projects all over the world. It's too broad, and we need to start working on defining the criteria, and in order to be able to use it as a tool for all countries to be able to access it. Regarding the Durban, you mentioned the Durban platform. I believe you're speaking of the Durban Forum. Yes. Yes. The Durban Forum, as you know, it was this year was related to adaptation and the capacity building within the NDCs. It was a very interesting discussion, and the Durban Forum presented the results, the summary of these results. Everything is in the web page of the capacity building. You can see the results there. And what we did is that we decided we continue working with the Durban Forum for future years in order to be able to link both processes and be able to build upon the discussions from the Durban Forum and feeding into the PCCB. Then on the UN agencies coordination is, it's a very good question. I've worked for multilateralism for too many years, and it's not an easy issue. Nonetheless, now I believe that having the SDGs on board and linking, everything is linked in the 13 SDGs. Therefore, this is, I think, a common denominator that can link all the conventions regarding development, not only environment, development that can in some way help coordinate the UN agencies. This is just an idea, and I think we should take advantage, because we need to link the efforts of the 20, which I don't believe it's 2030 agenda, but that's what it's called. I think the SDGs is, it'll go even beyond that, that date. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that was actually precisely the message of Amina Mohammed when she spoke here to the plenary, the number 2 in the UN system. Lucy, you wanted to come in on the mitigation versus adaptation question. We always have this image of, is it that farmers actually go out on Monday morning and put the hat on, I'm working on the Sendai framework, on Tuesday is my mitigation day, and Wednesday is the adaptation day, or how is that playing out? Please.
Thank you very much. You're right. I think it's a time we really get out of this. The discussions of adaptation and mitigations are here. I started as a frontline extension worker, visiting a farmer from door to door. And when you go into a farm, the first thing you want to see is a good crop, because that's what will translate to a healthy child in that home, some incomes, on and on and on. And I know he's pulling a leg, telling me that adaptation on Monday, Tuesday is mitigation day. The point is, as we work with our farmers in the developing countries, and I guess all over, we aren't going to the farmers with that language. To synthesize and find out what are the packages, what are the interventions, how do we put in our policies and strategies, what is it that we put there that answers priority to adaptation? And then, like I posed the question earlier, what the mitigations thereof, we want them captured because it's a commitment that we'll report. And of course, that was a challenge I posed earlier, and I guess it will remain a challenge until maybe the negotiations have taken a further and other support systems are put in place. So when we are into a farming system, what we want to capitalize is the synergy between the two. But adaptation being the priority, you don't want to have a bright eye on the opportunity that is there for mitigation. You have nothing to lose, do you? But again, it's when we leave these discussions, we take these discussions beyond this platform. We want to have, like I said, you analyze them. Maybe that's a better and easier word. You analyze them and package them to a point where now you're talking to a farmer in a very rural part of Kenya, and you're telling that farmer, it's good to have some agroforestry trees in your farm, because you don't have to encroach the forest. You will harvest your firewood. The trees will have nitrogenous effect, or you can have these shrubs that can feed your livestock. Below these trees, you can grow your vegetables. You can sell 2 or 3 trees after a few years for timber, or use timber for your construction. That's sustainability kind of approach. But remember, when that tree is planted, it will sink carbon, won't it? But the farmer may not have business. In fact, when the experts will come around and say these farmers in this area have a population of 1 million trees, and you want to look like what is the mitigation from this location, the farmer will be busy digging in their farms. I hope it makes sense, because we don't want to take that discussion so much scientific and technical to the grassroots. It's for us to synthesize, we package it to the policies, and down to the actual things that the farmers can practice for them to be food secure and incomes, have sustainable, farming ecosystems going. And when the arrival is good, Walter and I will be busy discussing what are the emissions from those and trying to, either negotiate for other things. But the farmer at that level must be put in a position where adaptation and mitigations are working for their good and for good for the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. And what I also hear is resonating with the question the gentleman from Colombia asked about marginalized populations and how you empower the population. And I think that's one of the key challenges in the agriculture sectors, that we are dealing with more than 1 billion people who are working in the ag sectors. And many of them are exactly the most vulnerable and most marginalized. We have 80% of the world's food insecure actually being smallholder farmers. So I would also encourage, I don't know whether you want to add on to this question about the politics of it. And I'm always saying that in the different approaches we are having, the voluntary guidelines on land tenure play a crucial role, because it starts with the ownership, or at least the understandable rights on your piece of land, that you actually can start working on the land. Lucy, happy if you want to comment on that, and then Walter, please.
Okay, I wanted to leave that to Walter, but it's the same vibe actually, because the Colombia colleague talked of even the politics, again, the gap is the same thing I'm saying, the politics and the actual on the ground. That gap must be bridged in a way that it does not, affect the farmer in the way they do things. Because, the farmers will see us demonstrating here and there, making comments, to understand, or even saying that we are looking for resources to do 1, 2, 3 things. But before that happens, because it's a big process, what is it as a country are you doing? So you must be able to separate the politics from the actual and do your small things to change that. Maybe Walter would add on that.
Thank you, Martin. Well, yes, for us, what we see, of course, the fundamental importance of adaptation for agriculture, and the way in which we are communicating these challenges to farmers could be resumed in the question: do you feel you are well adapted to current variability and extreme events? The answers we are getting from them is no, we are not well adapted, because when extreme events come, they produce a big damage. Then we say, all right, with climate change, these climate extreme events may be more intense and more frequent in the future. Start filling the gap we have now, which is something that the farmer feels. The farmer knows very well the impacts of climate variability and climate extremes. So this is a starting point or entry point for the relating the challenges of increasing productivity, of increasing also the resilience of the systems. From that, the second step will be to think, well, adaptation is local benefit, but mitigation is a global benefit. So this is a fundamental difference. So if we recognize that adaptation may have in many opportunities also mitigation benefits, it is very good to recognize them. And frankly speaking, is what we have done in our NDC. We are recognizing the many synergies that there are between adaptation and mitigation. If we increase the organic matter in soil, this is productivity, this is resilience, and this is also mitigation. So why not recognizing it and including it into our NDC? Then we have a challenge. How do we monitor soil organic carbon? This is a big technical challenge. Well, we have to address it. And in some cases, there may be trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation, but we think that in the majority of cases, via the increasing productivity and increasing efficiency, there is a big opportunity to capture the co-benefits of mitigation, which are important for at country level in particular. So with farmers, we speak about how to increase their income, how to make their systems less vulnerable to climate events. And we also say, well, you know, these actions have also some benefits because address the real fundamental causes of these disturbances of climate we are producing. So there are opportunities to contribute to that.
Thank you very much, Walter. I would give the floor briefly to Romeo, and we're doing well in time. If you have additional questions, we can open the floor again for your short questions. And Romeo, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, nothing much to add, but I think whether it be agriculture or other sectors, it doesn't really matter. There are always these win-win situations. I don't know, the Sao Tome, for instance, I recently visited, and of course the footprint of Sao Tome and the emission impact of Sao Tome and Principe is very, very marginal. It doesn't really make sense to talk about them in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, right? However, dependency on imports, on fossil fuels and so forth is extremely high, and the amount of money going into that sector is extremely high. So the desire to substitute fossil fuels for energy production, for instance, by using renewable energies, brought them into an NDC, which is pretty much straightforward, saying we need about $50 million to become completely zero GHG in our renewable energy in our energy sector. So, saying this also to our colleague from India, I mean, there are always very good examples where you can do mitigation, and where you and you just mentioned that in the agricultural sector it's the same, where you can save a lot of money and actually drive the economic development and detach the growth from emissions. So there are many of those examples whenever you go, and these are not necessarily reflected here in the negotiation room. It's more like the concrete on the ground kind of stuff, which is very appealing sometimes to me, as not being a climate person, but rather more a development person.
Thank you very much, Walter. You wanted to briefly comment.
Thank you, Martin. I just wanted to add something that is very important for developing countries. The way in which the financial mechanisms is being structured dedicates half of the resources for mitigation and half of the resources for adaptation. This is real thing. So how can our agricultural sector, our policies, our farmers access these means of implementation is relevant questions. If we think only on adaptation, we will access half of the cake. So sorry for being so pragmatic, but there are co-benefits of adaptation and mitigation. There are co-benefits of mitigation on adaptation. There are co-benefits of mitigation on productivity, on development, on income by farmers. So we have to include all opportunities in our view and not to exclude any of them. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's one of the recurring topics, that given that there are so many things that agriculture does, it's always difficult to put it in a specific drawer and say, I'm presenting this project as this. I think the gentleman from India wanted to come back. We have the microphone here. And then there is a question all the way in the back, the lady raising her hand, and then in the middle. Yeah, if you see the two
or
ladies.
Maybe I took floor once, so I can pass on to her first. Can I?
Well done, well done.
Okay. Thank you very much for colleagues and great presentations. I really learned many things I didn't know. Thank you very much. I have one question I would like to ask. So, here we have opportunity to listen what is solutions on that achieving the Paris Agreement through climate change actions in the land sector. And my question is, some other colleagues also asked that we need support to farmers to both adapt to and to mitigate climate change. And so especially in these mitigations need to some allocation of some budget from the government to support these farmers. However, so like we can observe that there are lots of countries, especially indebted, like so very poor countries in poverty, countries in poverty have lots of debt, and they are not allowed to allocate their national budget to agriculture sector. That is one issue. And also like their PRSP, etc., which needed to be agreed with World Bank, IMF to allocate their budget. And normally it is very difficult for these countries to do it. And also the World Trade Organization doesn't allow to substantial subsidies to support the farmers. That is also some issues. I wonder that if mitigation technologies and those it if it is the developing countries to develop their own farmers by themselves. What measures so in this situations can manage? And also another question is that the mitigation technology on agriculture is too much dominated by transnational companies in developed countries, from developed countries, and some issues on genetically modified technologies, which have certain concerns by developing country farmers, as well as citizens, general citizens and NGOs. And it is, we are not sure what ecosystem concerns can be arised. That is so make some issues in the opinions and differences in the discrepancies among what we need and what to do for the different countries to grow their farmers and land sector issues in the mitigations. So I would like to ask your opinions on this regard. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. If you can pass the microphone 5 rows in front of you, the lady in the middle. Just straight ahead 5 rows, if someone can. So here it is.
Thank you. Thank you. They were very interesting presentations, so thank you very much. And I'm particularly pleased to hear the level of understanding in the panel about the links between improving the biological health of the soils and agricultural systems for delivering multiple benefits, adaptation, mitigation and livelihood benefits. So that was very encouraging. I wondered, and I think there was a reference early on from someone on the panel suggesting that there are much more opportunities to link some of the considerations around forests into planning at the sort of, landscape scale that picks up, I guess, the same concepts of improving the biological health of natural forests and restoring degraded natural forests, and whether you see the potential, if you can improve the productivity of agricultural systems, to directly link that to the other agendas that are being talked about here of protecting primary natural forests and restoring degraded natural forests, and whether, as well as potentially, purpose planted trees for wood or other sorts of crops. So I'm just interested in the panel's views on how those linkages might emerge through the negotiations.
Thank you very much. I think we can take one last question if anyone wants to take a last question. Yes, sir, the gentleman from India wanted to come in again.
No, just quick 2 points I wanted to highlight. One is the fact that in developing part of the world, be it Africa, be it Asia, the farmers have very small land holding, and they are always challenged by the vagaries of weather in any case, climate change or no climate change. And there are no monopolists who have to be disciplined. There are, unlike the developed countries where the agriculture is highly mechanized, and where you have bigger land holdings and high levels of subsidy, as we have seen at other different fora. Here the subsidies are very less, and people are dependent on mainly rains, the sweet will of gods and winds, I would say. So that is one point I want our colleagues to remember, all of us here, that in developing countries, this is the stark reality. The other thing I was wanting to ask in a non-diplomatic, straightforward, and maybe there is a Chinese I don't have a Chinese colleague here, but there is a Chinese proverbial saying that you need to be good enemies to be good friends subsequently. So if non-diplomatic, straightforward question to FAO, that would it be interested in pursuing this? Because now that the funds in the various funding mechanisms are quite uncertain, because it is nearly after 27 years that FAO has just again shown interest in climate change. It has woken up now, that, but would it continue to be associated with the subject? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's take the panelists first, and then I would change my role and become a panelist and answer you what I think on FAO, and I'm trying to do that in a way that I'm not losing immediately my job. But before we do that, let's just come back with the panel to the questions that were raised. National budgeting for smallholder farmers, how are big companies coming in? And the question from the lady about forests as natural ecosystems, and how can farming measures take that into consideration? And system diversity, ecosystem functions as preconditions for agriculture can be factored in landscape-based planning. Let's go with very short answers, and then I would take the liberty and reply to you on the FAO question. Romeo, you want to come in?
Well, on very specific questions, and I'm not a forest or agricultural person, but what I saw on my trips and in my life as a cooperation person, I think what is done in the red area and in the red context, what is done in landscape restoration and so forth, is very much going into the direction what you said related to the integration of forests into the whole system. And I think that is absolutely crucial, because that is of high importance to conserve the forests and to make them part and parcel of the whole NDCs. How you measure that and how you actually operationalize that is certainly something very, very, very challenging. From our perspective, when we had to reach out to the countries, and when we discuss with the ministers in charge, by all means, agriculture and forest is always very, very top on the agenda when it comes to the interplay between the SDGs, the NDCs, and of course the national planning.
Thank you very much. Walter, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Martin. My brief comment on the issue of the very little smallholders is that there is a need that countries develop differentiated policies toward different types of farmers. So it's totally reasonable that countries have to recognize socioeconomic aspects linked to development and climate responses. So this is something that every country has to assess according to the national circumstances. On the second issue of the landscape forest, I think it's very interesting to see this level in action, not only the farm level, but also the farms in a landscape where there are many farms, there are many agroecosystems or production system combined, and where the ecosystem services go beyond the limits of a farm. So when we try to restore ecosystem services, take care of the water cycling, or nutrients management, there are many things that cannot be addressed properly at farm level, that has neither a landscape or watershed approach. So, for example, in a landscape, one farm may be emitting methane, and other farm may be sequestering. So the dynamic at the landscape is different to the dynamic at the farm level. I think that the landscape approach is very interesting and promising for in particular policies at local or subnational level.
Thank you very much. Lucy, any comments?
I think just what my colleague Walter said, where you have smallholder farmers and 70% of farmers in Kenya are smallholder farmers, what you want to go into, because you aren't going to increase the farm holdings because of large tenure and such kind of dynamics. What you want to go into is the intensification in terms of increasing productivity per unit area, of course, with efficient use of resources, may it be water, may it be fertilizer, may it be integrating agroforestry, even in the smaller holder farming. Because if you're going to integrate something like agroforestry, you also have to have in mind of the size of the farm. So you design a configuration of tree into that farm in a way that it is not going to affect productivity, because it is the configuration, it is the type of trees, the number of trees, of course. If you have 1 acre, you're not going to put the whole acre under trees, the type of trees, and that, unit, that look at the unit productivity per unit area will be very crucial for smallholder farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that gives me 2 minutes to reply to your question. The short answer is yes, by all means. FAO was founded in 1945 with a double mandate: to fight hunger and to fight poverty. In today's terms, we would call that SDG 2 and SDG 1, while at the same time looking at SDG 13. And yes, you're absolutely right. The organization was not too visible for a very long time. But what we see now with the ag negotiations is an interesting situation, and that explains it to a bit. We have 90% of the countries who are mentioning in the NDCs that they want to work on agriculture. 90%, but at the same time, it is still very, very difficult to come to an agreement in Sub-Saharan around agriculture. So there are two different universes. There's a negotiation universe in which things are very, very difficult. And I dare say, because there's always the fear that there would be a top-down instrument imposing anything on member states, and very few issues are more sensitive than agriculture. And very clearly, many member states have a big problem with that. So that was also that as a member-driven organization, as a UN organization, one had to be very, very careful in how you lobbied for what in the climate change space. What we see and what we translated in publications like this one is actually that this is a different logic now. We have so many member states who say, we want to work with you on agriculture. We need your support to technically do that. And it's our job to respond to that. And you might or might not know, FAO has a brand new climate change strategy. And since we're a big old organization, it has to pass through 7 governing bodies, but we cleared all of these hurdles, and now we have a climate change strategy in place, which places the support for member states in becoming climate resilient and climate smart as the #1 outcome. So we are here to stay, and we are very happy to see so much energy that is going into the agricultural sectors, currently more in the action space, in the NDC partnership, in the bottom-up country activity, but we are also very eager, I have to say, that in the negotiations, inside the UNFCCC negotiations, we continue to speak about agriculture, and we continue to understand and to frame agriculture, yes, as part of the problem, but to an even bigger extent as part of the solution. And with that, I thank you for coming, and please join me in thanking our panelists. Rita had already to go. And since we are about food security, there's something to eat waiting for us outside. Thank you.